Hi, Fred. Welcome back.
Good evening, Peter.
So, what have you been up to this week?
Well, I'm just near to completion of the next book that I'm writing, and I'm on an aspect that we might discuss this evening. You're the one of the Britain's leading experts on the subject, and that is the environment and how to deal with biodiversity and the extinction of species. Um, This is a vital topic which I believe is going nowhere for a very good reason. Uh, I'd like to explain why I think that, and then I'd like to ask you a series of questions, if I may. Uh, the alarm bells about nature and the environment have been rung since the 1960s. So we've had 70 years of a lot of talk about the need to change behavior to protect our natural habitats. And yet, the experts, the UN agencies, and so on, are telling us that we're still pouring out carbon into the atmosphere and will not achieve the zero goals. We're still killing species around the world, and there's very little on a global scale to show for all that effort after 70 years. And I believe that there's a reason for this. The damage that we humans have done to nature has been over at least the last, well, more than 500 years, but let's limit it to that length of time. We've been damaging the environment on a systemic scale. Whereas all the efforts that have been applied to try and reverse the damage so far have been piecemeal. And we are just not ever going to succeed on a piecemeal basis for a variety of reasons. Uh, Therefore, we need a systemic solution, which is what we need to concentrate on, and which I'd like to get your views on, if I may. Um, but let's start with the basics because our viewers, while they will be interested in the systemic solution, really need to know the nitty gritty of the problem. And Peter, you're a ecologist, an environmentalist. You're at the cutting edge of the activities that are being done in the UK to try and rehabilitate our damaged ecosystems. So, uh, what, in your view, do we really mean when we talk about nature and biodiversity and life? How do these concepts connect um, from an ecological perspective?
It's a complex issue, Fred, and obviously I've dedicated my life to understanding nature and its protection. And after a highly successful career, working for wildlife charities, buying nature reserves, developing rewilding techniques, the initial ones, I, with my colleague John McAllister, we did the first beaver reintroduction. We did huge amounts of work. But I came knocking on your door once, a long time ago. God, must be getting on 18 years ago or something like that, because I knew there was a systemic problem. But the question you asked is, how do we understand life? Well, we have to understand life and nature, and not to bamboozle people with all the academic theories, but life is everything. It's the little bugs in the ground. It's our soil. It's the complex interactions between soil and plants and trees and the atmosphere. It's about water, hydrology. All these factors come together to make life. In mankind has been using essentially land or the sea or the air, that volume, is where life comes together. And as we destroy aspects of it, both how the water flows and it's whether it's polluted, the air whether it's polluted, All of that makes up life. Without it, we can't have life, right? And biodiversity just means, it's got two aspects: how much of life, and what is the diversity, what's the different types of plants and animals and things like that. I like to think of life in a different way, and one day I hope to produce my book on it, which is to do with the concept of entropy in life. Because life is taking energy in the world, and it's forming stability, complexity that's stable. And that's the process of life, as I see it. But that's a bit esoteric. So we just got to understand life's all around us, and that life is dying out. The abundance of nature and the diversity of nature is disappearing all the time across the world. And because of that, that creates threats to humanity. And a lot of people don't realize a lot of the way the stories are presented in the news is not a good way of thinking about it. Basically, if we destroy life, we destroy our soils, we destroy the quality of water and air, and we have less animals living, we could end up causing huge problems to our future, to our children and our children's children. And that manifests itself in climate change, the biodiversity crisis. It could end up that we've got no soils left. What happens when we run out of oil and we can't produce fertilizers? The soil can't produce crops anymore because we've exhausted the soils. We could have huge problems in the future. So there's a brief overview of life.
But how do you link the specific projects that you've been involved in with the beaver in rivers and so on with the holistic problem, the integration of all the elements, not just beavers in the river, but how they link to the whole system? Do you ever get frustrated that somehow these very specific projects, humane though they are, delightful though they are to photograph, are not actually addressing the whole problem on a holistic basis?
Well, that's where both of our careers started coming together a long time ago, because we started, what's the root cause? That famous quote, there are thousands hacking at the branches of evil to one who strikes at its root. Is that Thoreau said that? And I wanted to get to the bottom of the problems of loss of nature. And it is about availability of land in a wild state. And the reason I got into rewilding, because species like a beaver or reintroducing a wild horse to an area of land, it doesn't require any effort from people. It doesn't require any donations to charities. You just need the land. And then nature takes over and does it all thing. It does its own thing, and it creates huge diversity. Why I was interested in reintroducing beaver, which was, good grief, I got into that in 1998 when we started our first project. Seems like a long time ago. But we knew that beavers take over land. They take over riverbanks. And they create wetlands, and they create a whole range of species. And what those wetlands do is they purify water, they suck carbon in it like no other type of animal. So a beaver can suck carbon back into soils way better than any other project we're doing. It's by far superior. I did some calculations and modelling where beavers, if they were across the country at a natural carrying capacity, could absorb as much carbon as the whole population of the UK create, which is a terrific amount. So it's about finding those holistic projects to get life to come back without huge amounts of money. But that's when I hit a brick wall. Because I was hugely successful in my career working with the wildlife trusts and then forming Wildwood Trust. I was, right at the leading edge. I'd bought many thousands of acres of land. I'd reintroduced many animals. I'd really pushed the boundary. But the real boundary was the economic one. Every time I raised money for nature, it was costing me more to do it. The price of nature reserves, I might raise £1,000,000, but then the landowners would put the price of the land up to match how much money I had. And that's when I started looking into your side of the equation, was what are the fundamental solutions to that?
So what we're talking about is the interface between nature and human life. What is it at that interface that currently creates a problem for environmentalists like yourself, but which also create problems for the people living on the other side of the divide, the human beings? What
Absolutely.
is that interface?
Well, that interface is really access to land, right? What is the cost of land? And that price keeps on going up. It goes up for both nature conservationists and the general population. That cost of a place to live or a place for wildlife to live is just getting higher and higher and higher. And it never stops getting higher. And therefore, we're given, and then when we get into the public debate with politicians and conservation organizations, people start giving us these false dichotomies. We can either save nature or you can have jobs. By protecting the environment, we're going to make everybody poor and poverty. And nobody challenges these false dichotomies, right? Futile trade-offs, as Mason Gaffney famously wrote about. So we've got this horrible problem where nature conservation not only costs a fortune, so when people donate or government give grants to protect nature, most of them don't work because it costs so much money to access land that we can't do it. And a lot of people think that protecting nature is going to impoverish them.
Okay, so the question becomes, what stops us from harmonizing the balance between the value of nature and the value of human society? Why is it that we can't synchronize these two through the land market?
Well, that's where we come to that fundamental issue of the privatization of economic rents. That our society over a long time, but certainly in my lifetime, we have an economy that's expanded the money supply, and all that money supply has basically kept the value of land going up, which has impoverished both us humans and nature. And without understanding that law of rent, the idea of what is economic rent, we can't fix the problem. We will forever have pollution, poor quality land, destruction of nature, and more poverty until we crack that fundamental issue that the money created through, if we took economic rent as government revenue instead of taxes on our wages and trade, and that not only would fund government and fund nature conservation and fund all the public services we need, but it also would do this amazing thing. It would mean that when we destroy nature, it would be more expensive. So the whole economy, if we had this economic rent as our tax base, everybody in the free market would be putting their minds to how can we use land more efficiently? How can we use pollutants more efficiently? How can we use carbon and fossil fuels and all these minerals we take from the ground more efficiently? Because the more we can be efficient, the more we're going to save in that economy. So, but at the moment, we have an economy, the more we can take, the more inefficiently we can use land, the more we can use natural resources, the more money we can make. And it is a predator culture.
But why is it that we don't hear the sort of thing that you're saying from the environmental scientists and the UN agencies that are striving to try and save nature? But I don't hear them talking in the way that you're just talking now. Why is that?
It's you know the reason, Fred. It's the same reason that your voice, as prophetic as it is not listened to in the halls of government in the same way. There's once upon a time I used to regularly give lectures at Oxford and Cambridge. I was a regular on television until I started talking about this idea of economic rent. And a lot of people don't want to do it. I often talk about to this with economic professors, with leaders in the many chief executives and chairs of conservation organizations, and they privately agree with me, but they are threatening the power structures in our society and economy. The fact that powerful people make their income from economic rents, and they don't want to hear the argument that we should have to pay when we benefit from nature's destruction, or we should have to pay when we rob other people of their income from holding a monopoly over them. So it is that predator culture that you described, whereby the public discourse has definitely been controlled by those who benefit from destroying the world.
So, so the problem is not so much the climate skeptics like Donald Trump, who says it's a con job. The ultimate problem tracks back to the vested interests that you've just described. Is that right?
Yes, it's totally right. So I don't look at Donald Trump and, all these mad climate skeptics any differently than I do to many of the people who profess that they are on the side of green economics or they're going to protect the planet. They're equally as bad, because many of the skeptics, like Donald Trump, say, global warming's a con job, and they're right. Now, that's weird. Why would I say that? That a really good ecologist would say that climate skeptics could be right. That's because many of the solutions that have been proposed to climate change and to reverse the loss of biodiversity are con jobs. They're literally complete cons. The whole system that we have of how we subsidize land just pushes its price up, right? So subsidizing conservation charities and other things actually make it harder for land to come into conservation. We have schemes like biodiversity net gain credits. I could list off loads of names that are in the business, but they all aren't. They're just enriching middlemen. They're enriching bureaucrats. They're not making a fundamental difference on the ground. A lot of this carbon credits stuff that goes on, it doesn't stop us producing carbon. It just turns the people who own those carbon credits into the monopolists. They are landowners, economic rent seekers of carbon. It hasn't reduced the amount of carbon. We've put up all of these, windmills, wind turbines, and solar panels, but still our use of carbon is going up. We haven't reduced it because we haven't put in the base economic processes that are needed to stop that. So when we get to the solutions, what are the solutions to these things? Well, people who take land should use it efficiently, and if they don't, they should pay. We know that it's much more complicated than that in the deep economic processes, but basically the idea of that taking the economic rent of land as a tax would totally concentrate development. It would mean we only farm on the best farmland, and all the rest of the countryside would go back to the wild. We could rewild 40% of the UK. easily. And if we want to stop people, taking oil and coal out of the ground and burning it, why don't we just charge a tax on that, right? We charge a fee for that process, and that would turn everybody in our economy into people who were using less land in their own personal needs and the business needs that need to use land, farming, whatever. And it would turn everybody as part of the solution to the problem of putting carbon into the atmosphere. Because then the every decision we would make, it would be cheaper to use the process that put less carbon into the air. So we would create a positive and virtuous cycle of protecting our planet, protecting the natural resources of our planet, and leave them to our children.
So you're saying that the current policies are in the form of bribes to people, instead of requiring them to simply pay for what they extract out of nature to balance supply and demand, harmonize the relationships. We are actually encouraging the bad behavior by subsidies, which are actually cash bribes. That's what you're saying, isn't it?
Yeah, we're in a market whereby if somebody who produces pollution or uses land, they can earn so much for it, and often not very well taxed on it. But people like me, is a conservationist, not only do we have to pay taxes on our labour and trade, but then we have to raise the colossal sum to pay off the people who are abusing nature to get them to stop doing it. And the government's doing that. God knows how many billions of pounds have been spent, and it's pointless. It just pushes up the cost even more to protect wildlife. As we try to bribe and pay off these people, it just increases what they want. It never ends.
So it comes back to the political problem of politics, which has been hijacked by those who extract the net income, the rents, out of society, and who control the discourse. How do we overcome that problem?
We certainly, what I've spent my time, and as you know, I've spent a lot of time doing wildlife TV programs and all that kind of stuff. So I've tried to discuss it in the media, but really, I've always tried to do projects that try to circumvent these rent seekers, right? So the beaver project was a great project because beavers go and occupy land, essentially steal it from the landowners, right? So that's great. That circumvents, and if we can show these quick wins, but mostly the messages I've tried to say is, if you understand rewilding, it means you don't need conservation officers, you don't need nature reserves, you don't need ways, you just need nature can look after itself. Let it get on with it. It just needs to be left alone. And, our planet and our children's future just means we shouldn't be polluting it. And we have to get that message out. And there are examples whereby, around the world, there's many examples where nature works. We can look at different countries that have introduced some form of economic rent taxation. Costa Rica is an area you studied. I've seen it through history in Taiwan and Japan. Even places like Hong Kong, which are highly used, still have areas of good nature, and that's because of the way the land market is. The government can extract some of the cost. But the perfect example of how to protect wildlife is in the Falkland Islands, where they've got a type of squid that's very popular to be fished, and the Falkland Islands were poor, so they charged a fee. So you have to get a fee that's based on how many fish are left and what people are prepared to pay, an auction, if you will. And that means that funds the entire government of the Falkland Islands. And of course, the fee keeps on going up. So the less squid you've got, the fee gets higher, and therefore it regulates the amount of fish taken. So you've got a perfect system that funds government, that protects nature, and we just have to get that message out. There is an easy way to basically have an untaxed economy that protects nature and provides funds, as long as the polluters pay, the people who take from nature pay, and those people who try to say, nature's mine, you have to pay me a fee to access nature, they have to have that money removed. Because nature conservation today is essentially landowners saying, you have to pay me if you want nature to exist. They are holding nature to ransom. They've got a hold of it and they're holding a gun and say, I want your money or it goes. That's essentially the world we're living in, and we must reverse that.
So we come back to property rights and the whole ideology on which our society is based, because it's not just nature, but it's human beings who face the very same problem. People who need homes are confronted with precisely the same gun to their heads as you've described in relation to natural habitats. How do we unify this story, nature and human society? Well, we need a mass movement of some kind that combines the two. Instead of ecology being separated from the political challenges of urban living and so on, we need to unify them, don't we?
We do. So we get back to that false dichotomy we started, which in that those futile trade-offs. Nature, it does not need to make people poor. In fact, if we think about it deeply enough and start understanding what economic rent really means, it means that we can have a perfect future for our children where they have no poverty, they live in abundance, they can have a high-tech world, but they can have nature and clean rivers and a clean atmosphere, as long as we understand that economic rent must be the tax base. So it's why I got in touch with you all those many years ago, Fred, because I read one of your books and it just clicked. It absolutely clicked. You know, I'm a pretty bright guy. I've got lots of degrees, you know, a bit of an autistic, mathematician and doing ecological modeling and all that kind of stuff. So I kind of understood the science of it all, but I didn't get it until I read one of your books. And once I read your book, the world just became obvious to me. And that's why I tell everybody to read your books, Fred. It doesn't matter which one, just pick up one of them and read it, and then you will understand how we can solve the world's problems. Both poverty, society, and ecology can all be solved with one simple mindset change. And it's getting that mindset change. As we know, many people call it seeing the cat, don't they, Fred? You've got to see the cat.
And on that note, Peter, I think we can conclude this Friday evening's talk. Thank you very much indeed. We do owe you a great deal for the work that you're doing for nature, and you need to be credited for it. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Fred. And my latest challenge is quite interesting. So just at the moment, I'm trying to prove that restoring habitats stop a town from flooding. This is called natural flood management. So over the last 2 years, I've had a fantastic time trying to recreate beautiful habitats that suck water in and stop a town from flooding. And when you look at many of the problems humanity faces, it's because we're destroying nature. And I know you get these awful climate skeptics, we get them in the comments here, who think we're all talking rubbish, but I'm not. Nature's so important. And if we start learning why restoring nature is going to benefit us, we'll all value that so much.
Well, the families whose homes are being flooded by rivers now almost every night on our TV in the news, we see large parts of California or Spain being devastated by those rivers. If they can be told the message that you've just been given, a lot of people might throw their weight behind your proposal for change. Thank you very much indeed, Peter.
Thank you, Fred. You take care.
Good night.